Well, UFC 193 was just kind of moving along, somewhat forgettable event on the Sunday morning/afternoon in Melbourne, Australia, and then the main event happened. And then Holly Holm happened. And then that head kick knockout happened. And all of a sudden, we're in a whole new era in the sport of mixed martial arts. Holly Holm, yes, Holly Holm, one of the biggest underdogs in UFC history, is the new UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. She shocked the world. She knocked out Ronda Rousey in the second round. Hello again, everyone. This is the MMAfighting.com post-fight wrap-up show. These are the new darlings of the MMA media scene, the guys from Submission Radio. That is Kacper, that is Deniz. Guys, thank you very much for the time. Once again, let me get your thoughts, Kacper, right off the top. When you saw Holly Holm knock out Ronda Rousey here in Melbourne, what were you thinking?
First of all, it's always a pleasure when somebody calls me darling, so I appreciate that, Ariel. In all seriousness, to me, it's like, is this real? Is this really happening? I can't believe that Holly Holm actually beat Ronda Rousey. Not only beat her, but just the way she did it. We spoke about this yesterday. My prediction, I was completely wrong. I thought Ronda Rousey was going to close the distance. As soon as that happens, throw her on the ground like she did her past opponents. It didn't happen. The judo was completely ineffective. And I said to you the same thing, that Holly Holm, she's not known for that crazy knockout power. People are saying, oh, if she touches Ronda, she's going to go down. I didn't think it was possible. She did put her down, and the comments that I see on the internets and the interwebs, people asking, was Ronda out cold? And people say, colder than a dead body.
Wow. Very well put. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, we spoke on the pre-fight show, and we spoke about how Holly Holm could do it, but really, did anyone really believe it? Because when I saw it happen, I got Kacper to pinch me, there was a random person behind me, they pinched me too, and then I went up to a person, they said, don't touch me, don't talk to me, so I walked away. But the fact is, there were people in the crowd crying. It was a surreal moment. I haven't experienced anything like this before, Ariel, when it comes to combat sports. Dana White said it's one of the biggest upsets ever. Coach Wink said to us, it was the biggest upset ever. To me, it was, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like something was happening in front of me, but it wasn't processing in my brain. I expected Ronda Rousey to get up, take her belt, walk into the back, come back in and beat Holly Holm. That's what was going on in my mind. It was just absolutely amazing. And the whole crowd, crying people jumping up and down. I mean, it was just, for people that weren't there, it was like a huge crazy thing was happening, and the crowd was just either they're super sad, super happy, but there was no one just sitting there eating popcorn, just relaxing.
You know, it's such an interesting show, guys, because yes, it goes down as the biggest crowd ever in UFC history, right? But as you know, you were sitting there. I was actually in the back watching all of this on a monitor, so I couldn't really take in the crowd, but it was very clear to me that this was a dead crowd. This was a crowd that was uninspired until that moment. You were sitting there. What was it like? He gave us his perspective. Was it a shocked crowd? Was it a happy crowd because they've sort of taken to Holly throughout this week? What was it like?
Well, before that happened, you're right, it was a very sleepy environment. I mean, during the Joanna versus Valerie fight, there was a Mexican wave going. And
What's a Mexican wave?
So basically, part of the crowd, you've got whatever, the circular arena, part of the crowd starts throwing their hands up in the air and stomping their feet, and then it kind of goes around the whole arena in a circle, kind of like a wave format. And you see that at footy shows like the AFL, and I've always thought, watching here at this stadium, man, that would be so cool at a UFC event. And then it happened, and I was like, this is not what I expected. There's a fight going on. This is really disrespectful. So you could tell the crowd was pretty bored. When Ronda came out, everybody was on their feet. This was clearly the moment that had arrived, why a lot of people bought their tickets. Holly Holm, again, people were excited. She got a great pop from the Australian crowd. But when that head kick knockout landed and Ronda was on the ground, completely out of it, unbeknownst to anything that was happening around her, it was shock, it was pandemonium, it was like New Year's Eve, basically. Wow. The arena came alive.
And let's just point out something else. I mean, it was at the afternoon. There were a lot of people who were sleepy, half asleep, but Jared Rosholt versus Stefan Struve. I mean,
I believe you called it.
I mean, let's just talk about this just for 1 second. The crowd here was full of casual fans who don't understand MMA. And I was listening to the crowds in all the different areas. I had a bit of a walk around. People were going, what is going on right now? Why isn't he hitting him? Why is he just lying there? Why, you know, there were some people that were talking about, why did I get this ticket? I mean, there was some negative reaction to that fight. And that's why it's so important to have the right fight to kick it off. Stefan Struve versus Jared Rosholt was a gamble. It did not pay off, and it really hurt this card. There's just no doubt about it, and we can't deny it.
Back to Ronda Rousey. Was she exposed tonight?
She was exposed. I mean, here's the fact. Everybody starts to jump on the train. Everybody jumps on the bandwagon and everybody believes something. When it gets broken, you just really see what was really going on. She was fighting girls that weren't at the level of Holly Holm. The division just didn't have the skill, didn't have the same skill as Ronda Rousey. Holly Holm, me and Kacper were talking about it before. She's big, she's long, she's athletic, she's strong. We were watching the footage of Betch getting knocked out. She was small. She was nowhere near the skill level of Holly Holm. This was her first real test, and it opened up everybody's eyes to what she can and can't do.
And right now, Ronda loses. It's shocking. It's every word that you can, describe an amazing moment in sport history. Is this devastating also for the UFC, or do you think that the rematch will just be that much better?
I think the rematch will still be big, of course. I think it's just a tough sell just because it wasn't close at all. Well, in saying that, Ronda did land some good shots. There was, I think, 1 or 2 punches that she landed and Holly looked like she was in trouble. It was a great fight from start to finish, but I think a lot of that mystique just poofed straight out the window. And a big part of Ronda's marketing was that she's the most dangerous woman in the world. For the heavyweights, it's the baddest man on the planet. For Ronda Rousey, not any bantamweight. For Ronda Rousey, it was the most dangerous woman in the world. You hear news anchors saying it, you hear people that have no idea MMA saying it. She's no longer the most dangerous woman in the world. And you could argue now whether it's Holly Holm, whether it's Chris Cyborg, but now there's a legitimate debate going on.
Right. And someone who was successful in another sport. Go ahead.
I just wanted to also say that, now you wonder what's going to happen in this rematch, because you're looking at the dynamic of Edmund and Ronda. The gym, will it still be around? Edmund gave us some terrible advice in between the rounds. Didn't make any sense. Is he the right person for her? Because let's have a look at all the other people from the gym. Travis Brown, Jake Ellenberger. I mean, these guys aren't doing very well at all. Was it Ronda Rousey all along, or was it her coach? Because right now, I'm just not sure what we'll see when she returns. Will we still see her with Edmund, or is it time for her to go out into a camp like Jackson Winkle-Johns, where she actually has guys that aren't, fantastic boxers, but really know the game of MMA? That's what she needs to do.
What'd you make of her game plan?
Well, we had Ronda Rousey's mum on the show a while ago, and she says something along the lines of, come to the dance with what, I don't know, bring to the dance with what brought you, or something like that. Basically, if it's working for you, don't change it. I just think at the end of the day, Holly Holm was the better fighter. I think Ronda Rousey was shocked that she wasn't able to take her down.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where adjustments needed to be made. I mean, you're looking at two different types of coaches. You're looking at Edmund, who believes that, and I mean, he's a fantastic coach, all respect to him. He's been on the show many times, and I think he's great with boxing and many other MMA fighters. But you got Edmund, who told her to keep doing something that wasn't working. And then you got Greg Jackson and Coach Winklejohn, who assess things as they happen and modify the game plan. I mean, if it isn't working, you have to find something else. Ariel, if you're hitting your head against the wall and it's a brick wall, you're going to knock yourself out. There's no way of busting your head through that wall.
Did this historic moment save UFC 193? Because again, it's record-breaking, but it was somewhat of a dull show leading up to this point. Co-main event was fun. We'll get to that in a second. But in your opinion, did all these fans who walked away from this stadium this afternoon say, okay, I got my money's worth, and if this was just a kind of dull main event, they wouldn't have said that?
You know what my biggest tell was? We've been to a lot of these events, especially here in Australia. We can't speak for how it is in the States. But here, once the main event finishes, oftentimes before they even read out the decision, people are out the door. People want to get their cars out. They don't want to be stuck in traffic. UFC is basically forgotten for them. Once Holly Holm won that, everybody stood there, everybody stayed, they wanted to hear the decision, the post-fight interview, everything. Even after that was all finished, everybody was still standing there. It just goes to show how much people appreciate that this is a part of history. But I agree, if it wasn't for that, and I expected that we'd be talking about this in this post-fight show, and I expected that a lot of these people, they paid money to see Ronda Rousey beat somebody in 30 seconds. And if they didn't get that, if they got Holly Holm dancing around the octagon for 5 rounds, maybe it was a lackluster decision, everybody would have gone, you know what, UFC's a piece of crap, because, well, they were never, a true MMA fan anyway. And whatever, that's up to them. The fact that this happened most definitely saved the card.
Deinis, can you explain to me why, I was talking to you guys about UFC 127 Acer Arena. My ears were literally ringing that morning listening to the crowd. This crowd, I didn't see flags. I didn't see any chanting, any singing, any dancing. I didn't see anything. It felt like they were here at a picnic. Why was that? Was it because it was so big? Is not the right stadium? Why do you think that was?
It's the wrong stadium, Ariel. I mean, in different parts parts of the crowd. People were trying to do the Aussie, 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 oi, oi, oi.
Couldn't hear it.
You couldn't hear it because one side would do it, the sound would travel very slowly to the other side would do it, and then eventually people gave up. Look, Etihad Stadium is fantastic for the big sporting events, but there's another arena here called Rod Laver Arena where the Australian Open plays its final. That's the perfect arena.
How big is that?
It's about 18,000 people. That's where the WWE do their Raw shows. That's where a lot of concerts happen. That's the arena to do it in. Ace Arena, fantastic arena because you can get into it. Once people gave up trying to get into it, then it was sort of the beginning of the end. But no doubt about it, the fights didn't deliver. A lot of fights didn't deliver. The Mark Hunt fight was strange. I mean, he finished Bigfoot, but there was something going on with his hand there. It was just a very lackluster fight. If it wasn't for Rob Whittaker and Uriah Hall, who knows if people would have even stuck around. It was just really, really bad.
Back to the main event, is this bigger than GSP Sarah, which up until this point I think most people consider the biggest upset in the sport's history?
I would say yes, just because even though GSP was, again, a media darling and just huge for the sport, I do think Ronda Rousey transcended a lot of barriers. And I've said this before, Brock Lesnar, huge draw, GSP, huge draw. You could say that GSP drew, to a degree, the women's market just because he was so ridiculously handsome. Ronda Rousey was an inspiration to women all over the place. And I think a lot of the fans, the however many, I forget how many thousands of people were here today, but a lot of those were women that were inspired by Ronda Rousey. So this is not just something that devastates MMA fans, it's going to devastate a lot of people. We haven't checked Twitter, but imagine all the celebrities who are crushed by this. Imagine all the young girls, or the women, or the news anchors, and all those people. So I do think it is on a much bigger stage than GSP Sarah. And of course, the sport is bigger than when it was, with GSP Matt Sarah.
And I don't know if this will resonate with you guys, but this reminds me a lot of UFC 71. That's when Quinton Rampage Jackson knocked out Chuck Liddell. Prior to that fight, it seemed like Chuck Liddell really turned the corner, as a mainstream star. He was on Entourage. He was on the cover of ESPN, the magazine. There was a ton of buzz. ESPN finally started covering the sport. And then what happens? He gets knocked out in around 90 seconds, and then everyone jumped off and said, this sport is a little too crazy for me. This reminds me a lot of it because it seemed like Ronda, after the Bethe Correia fight, turned the corner. Everyone was watching, and then she sort of gets exposed. And I'm very curious to see how people, react to this and if they stick around. Do they do the rematch at UFC 200, or do they do it before, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, it will have to be at UFC 200. I think Ronda Rousey wants to take a break. I'm curious, though, do you do the rematch, or do you give Holly Holm someone like Amisha Tate in the meantime? Will she
do the rematch?
You do the rematch?
You gotta.
Well, I mean, if they do the rematch, it's got to be at UFC 200. I think you got to give Ronda Rousey some time to take a break. She's got to reassess everything. It's more than just mental. It's got to be her coaching, her camp, what's she going to do in the future. She's got a movie that's going to be coming out soon. But it will be a shame to see Holly Holm take a break for such a long time.
Okay. I got to also say, in a way, I think this is good for MMA because I don't know how much you've been following the ratings and traffic and internet trends and all that. I'm assuming you would, obviously, with MMAfighting.com, which is a great site. But the term that we heard recently is that the media is cannibalizing themselves with this Ronda Rousey content. Ronda Rousey's huge, but there's just so much Ronda Rousey stuff on everywhere. We're seeing news outlets covering Ronda Rousey that have nothing to do with MMA. And I think people were just getting a little bit sick of Ronda Rousey. And now you've got Holly Holm as the new champion. I don't know. It kind of seems to me like it's good for business. It's something fresh and it's something new. Your question was the rematch. Do you do it at UFC 200? Here's a scenario. The rematch of Holly Holm and Ronda Rousey. The rematch of Daniel Cormier and John Jones. I don't know. Call it vengeance or something like that.
I like it. Okay, final question to both of you. We've obviously spent all this time talking about the main event, and I think rightfully so. It's the one that needs to be talked about. But Joanna Jędrzejczyk successfully defended her title over Valerie Turno. A fun fight. A lot of heart showed. It was a lot of fun to watch, in my opinion. Also, some great performances. You mentioned Mark Hunt. You also mentioned Robert Whittaker. I won't mention Jared Rosholt to piss you off.
Don't piss him off, please.
Jake Matthews had a big comeback win. But what's a performance not named Holly Holm that you really want to talk about? Is there some performance, some moments, anything you want to talk about to end this experience here in Melbourne?
Yeah, Jake Matthews. I told you to look out for him because he's a fast riser. I still think he is. He lost against James Vick. I think he came into that fight and he overcame adversity. I think he's been an incredibly, incredibly confident guy, especially for 21 years old. It's almost like he doesn't understand the term fear. And going to this fight, it was the first time that I've seen him a little bit vulnerable. He got that he got the head kick landed on him, and I think the way he overcame adversity really turned that switch. And in the second round, he didn't didn't get necessarily the stoppage that he was probably after, but I think from there on he looked good, and I think he's back on track. The other fights, while they were interesting, I wouldn't necessarily call them breakout performances. Like Dennis mentioned, the Mark Hunt fight, he was sort of stalking Bigfoot Silver. He landed that big right. I don't know. To me, it's the Jake Matthews fight that sticks out.
Your pick?
And since we're here in Melbourne, Australia, I mean, there's got to be some names we have to mention. Richard Walsh came out, started to cry in the back here while we were doing the post-fight interview, thinking about his relationship with Dan Kelly and Jake Matthews and everything they've been through. Obviously, him and Dan were on The Ultimate Fighter together. Dan Kelly spoke about how much time he takes away from his family, how much sacrifices he puts in. He owns a gym. He really needed this win. He had a fantastic performance. What about Cal Noak, who looked like he was at the end of his road in Adelaide? We ran into him after the fight. He was super bummed out. He had injury after injury. Now it looks like he's back. And obviously Jake Matthews, like Kacper mentioned, and also Ben Nguyen, I probably messed up his surname. This guy has kicked off a couple of UFC cards, one in Adelaide, one here. Obviously a huge viral sensation, but this guy is a big prospect in the division. I mean, we spoke to him. He was actually getting married. He had his wedding, and he was preparing for this fight. I don't know about you, Ariel. Obviously, I know you're married. You have a wonderful family. But I don't know if you could prepare for a fight doing that. And I know my girlfriend wouldn't let me focus on anything but that. So, I mean, you got to give the guy some brownie points. I mean, guys all over the world are going to start writing to him to find out, how do you do this? How do you get married and also do something else like fight in the UFC, fight in front of one of the biggest crowds ever?
And what about Holly Holm's timing? This is someone who, when she was working her way up the regional scene, if you will, in MMA, and she was taking a long time to sign that UFC deal. In particular, her longtime agent, Lenny Fresquez, was saying, I'm just not going to jump in there and take any kind of a deal. So she comes to the UFC, she wins 2 straight, she waits for the biggest show in UFC history, and she pulls off maybe the biggest upset in UFC history. What a story. They'll always remember November 15, 2015, when they finally write the official record book, the history book of mixed martial arts. So very honored that we got to be here and witness it in person, cover it for all of you, and great that we got to talk to these guys in person. Tremendous job, guys. Again, Submission Radio on YouTube. If you're not checking them out each and every week, you're missing out. Great work all week long here in Melbourne and prior to that and beyond as well. Big fan. Thank you so much. Great insight.
And I just want to say to New York Rick, obviously he's over there. I'm hoping he did well with his betting because this one was all over the place. I'm not sure who he had, but if he had the right bets, Rick, I hope he made the right amount of money. We'll have to listen to the MMA Hour. Guys, make sure you check it out. It's a fantastic program.
That's right. Lenny Fresquez, her agent, telling me he won over, he wouldn't say how much, 6 figures he won betting on his girl, Holly Holm. Good plug there. MMA Hour is actually off this week because of our travels. We also have a secret mission that you'll learn about a little later on. So no MMA Hour. That means you can catch up on Submission Radio. We are done from here in Melbourne. Thank you so much once again for watching our coverage. We appreciate it greatly. Again, Holly Holm is the new UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. Wow. Thank you. In UFC history is the new UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. She shocked the world. She knocked out Ronda Rousey in the 2nd round. Hello again, everyone. This is the MMAfighting.com post-fight wrap-up show. These are the new darlings of the MMA media scene, the guys from Submission Radio. That is Kacper. That is Dennis. Guys, thank you very much for the time. Once again, let me get your thoughts, Kacper, right off the top. When you saw Holly Holm knock out Ronda Rousey here in Melbourne, what were you thinking?
First of all, it's always a pleasure when somebody calls me darling, so I appreciate that, Ariel. In all seriousness, to me, it's like, is this real? Is this really happening? I can't believe that Holly Holm actually beat Ronda Rousey. Not only beat her, but just the way she did it. The comments that I see on the internets and the interwebs, people asking, was Ronda out cold? And people say, colder than a dead body.
Wow. Very well put. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, we spoke on the pre-fight show and we spoke about how Holly Holm could do it, but really, did anyone really believe it? Because when I saw it happen, I got Kacper to pinch me, there was a random person behind me, they pinched me.
Spoke about this yesterday. My prediction, I was completely wrong. I thought Ronda Rousey was going to close the distance. As soon as that happens, throw her on the ground like she did her past opponents. It didn't happen. The judo was completely ineffective. And I said to you the same thing, that Holly Holm, she's not known for that crazy knockout power. People are saying, oh, if she touches Ronda, she's going to go down. I didn't think it was possible. She did put her down.
Well, UFC 193 was just kind of moving along, somewhat forgettable event on the Sunday morning / afternoon in Melbourne, Australia, and then the main event happened. And then Holly Holm happened. And then that head kick knockout happened. And all of a sudden, we're in a whole new era in the sport of mixed martial arts. Holly Holm, yes, Holly Holm, one of the biggest underdogs